Good evening. And if you're just tuning in, you are listening to 105.3 and 107.7 out of the beautiful city of New Orleans, Louisiana, to the Angel Rock. And I'm your host, Lorilei Potvin. If you've never heard the show before or been part of the audience, I'll explain that in a minute. We already got Jonathan, JK47 Paranormal Investigations here. Hey, Jonathan. I'll tell you a little bit about myself. I'm a host of two shows on the network here. My name is Lorilei Potvin. This one, the Angel Rock, and Thursday nights I co-host with my wonderful friend and amazing psychic and medium David Hansel at 7 p.m. Eastern, the thing at the foot of the bed. I am a Canadian spiritual medium, a crystal Reiki energy healer, Akashic Records practitioner, a spiritual teacher and mentor. I'm also a budding animal communicator, well-versed in the paranormal, and I'm a registered nurse. And as if you've been to the show before, you've heard me talk about this many times. Professionally and personally, I have studied near-death experiences for over 40 years, and I had one as a toddler. And I'm going to introduce my amazing guest in just a few minutes. You know, I always start it with a bit of the few housekeeping things that we have. So if you like what you see, please like, share, and subscribe, and share it with all your friends and family. There's something for everybody here on this network. It's been around for over 25 years. We have multiple shows streaming 7 days a week. And when we're not streaming live, the archive server randomly picks shows over the last 25 years. And like I say, we have topics and shows for everybody here. So please help us out and share it with all your friends. Also, this network has its own TV channel. And if you'd like to watch, I'm streaming I think it's last night this month, and then we'll see what we do with this show. But we are on Roku. So if you want to find the channel and watch it on your TVs, what you do is you go to the channel store and you type in UFO space P as in paranormal. There's a drop-down list. We're about the third or fourth one down, and you're looking for UFO space Paranormal and United Public Radio. And there's many of the other shows that also stream on our network channel. So check it out. We also stream the thing at the foot of the bed there as well. Now you're going to see me say hello to people in the comments. We have a great audience. We love all the people that support our network and my shows, especially. I want to give a huge thank you to everyone. But if you want to join the conversation, 80% of our audience is audio only. So I can't see if they've got a comment or not, but we'd love to have you join the discussion. How you can do that is you can head over to UFO, Paranormal, and United Public Radio on YouTube and Facebook. I'm streaming on my YouTube channel, which is the Angel Rock with Lorilei Potvin. We're streaming on Canada's Most Haunted, and I actually forgot to do this as I'm talking. I got to start this. Hang on, guys. We're streaming on Instagram. How could I forget? I got so involved here. Usually I remember right away. So those are the places you can comment. I'll be able to see it. Just so you know, they're still working out the bugs with Instagram and StreamYard. So I have to keep popping over to Instagram if you're commenting. So if I don't see you right away, I'll keep popping in and I'll say hi to you. And if you've got questions or comments, try to address those. I think I've remembered everything. I usually forget something, but I'm going to introduce our illustrious guest here. He's got an interesting book that we're going to talk about, but he's had quite a career. His name is William Wilson Quinn. He's an alumnus of the University of Arizona with a Bachelor of Arts in 1970 in Literature and Writing. In 1978, he earned the degree of a Master's in Religious Studies from the University of Chicago's Divinity School, where he was a protege of Professor, I hope I say this right, Messiah Eliade, and therefore earned the PhD from the University of Chicago's Humanities Division in Philosophy. In 1989, he earned the degree of JD from Arizona State University. So he has a law degree, but this man has quite a career. I was quite impressed reading, and that's why I'm reading out his total biography here. From 1973 to 1978, Mr. Quinn was employed by the Boy, I knew I was going to screw up these words tonight. My mouth was not going to cooperate. By the Theosophical Society in America, where he joined in the year 1969. He was the first assistant editor and thereafter the editor of the American Theosophist, and then later Quest magazine, and an associate editor with the publishing house in Wheaton. Since his first publication in 1971, after leaving university, he has published 3 books, one being a revision of his doctoral dissertation in 1997, titled The Only Tradition, about the Philosophia Perennis in the writings of Ananda K. I'm not even going to, I'll let you talk about that afterwards, Bill. And from 19 to 1987, Mr. Quinn was an ethnohistorian for the Bureau of Indian Affairs, applying his graduate training in tribal religion to anthropological and ethnohistorical inquiries into American Indian groups seeking federal acknowledgement. Following law school, Mr. Quinn was in private practice for over 10 years in Phoenix, specializing in federal Indian law, first as a partner in the firm of Shea and Wilkes, and later as of counsel in the firm of Snell and Wilmer. So I wanted to start out with this part of his biography. He's written, as you can hear, quite a bit, but he's got a very interesting book that we're going to be talking about tonight, and it is called The Higher Spiritual Path. So welcome, Bill. I'm so glad to have you here.
Thank you very much, Lorilei. I'm glad to be here.
I'm sorry, I went over your bio ahead of time, and I went, oh crap, I know my mouth's gonna quit on me when I start reading these words.
Well, there are more tongue twisters in there than there ought to be.
That's why I skipped, because I would have kept going on and on. You've had a very illustrious career, including in a variety of areas. And when our friend Gavin Lee Davies, I always try to give him a shout out, from the publishing company with your book, he always sends me the best guests with the best backgrounds. And when I saw what your book was written about, I was like, oh, yes, this is right up my alley. So I'm going to go back a little bit, but what got you into that's quite a difference between, practicing law and then from the theosophical side. How did you get into all that? What led you there?
Well, I think I first got into it by virtue of the fact that in 1965, at the beginning of the hippie experience in North America.
That's when I was born.
Yeah, and in fact, the hippie experience was globally, mostly in English-speaking countries, but it was a global phenomenon.
Right.
There was, at that point, a really strong emphasis on spirituality, spiritual development, the importation of Eastern religions, people like, Baba Ram Das, who was actually Richard Alpert, who was an associate of Timothy Leary, the whole psychedelic experience, all of that sort of coalesced around and became the hippie experience. I actually wrote a book about that called The Articles of Aquarius. And I think it might be listed in there. That was one of actually I had 4 books published, not 3. That's a mistake in the bio that the press sent.
I apologize.
No, your fault. That's the press. Anyway, one of those books was about the hippie experience. But that is where I got my start, in a sense, in spiritual development, yoga, meditation, and the idea of the expansion of consciousness and the metaphysical planes that are beyond what we normally experience here, that are reached through the expansion of consciousness, preferably through meditation, but there are other means to do that as well. And that's where I got my beginning. And it turned out that after I was, I guess, in my 3rd or 4th year at the University of Arizona in Tucson, working on my bachelor's degree.
Okay.
I ran into the works of the authors who published through the Theosophical Society.
You said that much better than I did.
Yeah. And, that's an organization that really came down from H.P. Blavatsky in the mid to late 19th century. And she and this other man named Henry Alcott founded this organization, the Theosophical Society, in New York City in 1875, and then a few years later, moved its headquarters to India, where it remains. The headquarters, the international headquarters is there. But they have a big publishing program, and they publish precisely the types of metaphysical literature and books about spiritual development that I was so interested in when I was at the university, starting out on this big venture in life of following this path. And when I found their line of books in a local hippie bookstore, I started reading them voraciously. And it even got to a point where one of my professors, who was a professor of Hindu religion in the school of in the Department of Eastern Religious Studies at the university, actually allowed me to take a two credit reading course in theosophical literature. So that was even part of my bachelor's degree. That's how ingrained that was. And as part of that, I wrote an article for the monthly magazine of the Theosophical Society in America, where they have their national headquarters. And the editor there was so impressed by the article that I got a job offer.
Oh.
And I was delighted about that. And so following a little bit of travel, I went there and I began work as the assistant editor of the journal in which I had submitted that article in 1973. And that's where it all began. And that's a long answer to your question, Lorilei, but that's
that's okay. I'm going to give a quick shout out here because we've got somebody joining us for the first time. Michelle Plummer. She says, "Good evening, Lorilei, joining in here for the first time." Well, welcome. And I can see our usual crew that's here. We got Z-Sun Dragon, or Kevin is his muggle name, as we like to joke, the Harry Potter reference. We got Herbert Lopez here. We got Michelle from Australia. Let's see who else we got. Did I miss anybody? I don't think so yet. So everybody's welcoming the new Michelle here. So thank you for doing that, everybody in the audience. That's so sweet of you. And welcome to anybody that's just tuning in. So I guess where I was going with this, I didn't even get into how you got into law, but what came across my mind when you were talking about this is indeed, back in the 60s with the hippie movement, how did we ever transition out of that? Because it's almost like we're starting to come full circle, even with the introduction again of the hallucinogenic type drugs and the way that they're using them in a clinical setting. Exactly. And finding incredible, they can do things with that, as you well, I know you're familiar, like you just said, exactly, like say 10 years of therapy couldn't even touch things like PTSD and trauma and all kinds of things like that. So why do you think we got out of that movement? Because it was a beautiful movement.
Yes, it was. And, the movement was really centered around two principles, love and peace.
Yes.
And you didn't have to join an organization or do anything. You only had to make those the principal forces of your behavior and your activity in life to be a hippie. That's one of the arguments I make in that book that I wrote about.
I think to be a good human being, and I'm not that I'm being judgmental, but if I think that's why I'm asking, like, how do we get out of this? Because if we really let love guide us and orientate towards peace, we'd be in a completely different world, wouldn't we?
Right. Well, my view on that, to answer your question, is that there was a great deal of innocence in the hippie movement. It was wide open. Everybody was your brother or your sister. Everybody was welcome. Hitchhiking was very common. You give everybody a ride and so forth. And that openness was also a vulnerability. And once, after about 3 or 4 years, there started to be a lot more drug use among the hippies. There was some at the beginning. Mostly it was marijuana.
Yeah.
And, maybe some psychedelics here and there, but then it started to get into heavy, sedative-like and opiate-like drugs. And that's where it started to slide out of control. And then people started to take advantage of the openness and innocence of the hippies, and that together with the drug use, at least in my view, that's what put an end to it.
I think you're right.
Right around 1970, I think there was this really phenomenal 5-year period from 65 to 70. And then it just started to slide downhill, and it got commercialized, and it got mainstream is what happened. And so all the top fashion designers were doing bell bottoms and hippie clothing and, like that. And it sort of got monetized and drugified and all that. And it just sort of, lost its life. But for 5 years there, it was something else. It was some other energy in that atmosphere in that 5 years.
I appreciate that answer because I don't think I've ever asked anybody. And if you were what was referred to as a true hippie, you're right. Very innocent, completely open, hearts full of love. Like, none of this, what we see today. And again, I always say it's not my job to judge, but it's such a materialistic type society in developed countries, and they're even trying in underdeveloped countries. Like, everybody has a cell phone. And I just said this to I get together with a few psychic mediums myself and channelers, and we connect on the other side just to sort of see, is there any direction? Is there something maybe we can do? Not that we think we're going to change the world, but that if there's any way we could help out. And I said, it just seems with each new generation, with the incorporation of technology and it increasing and increasing and increasing, where we're now in the age of AI, what it's leading to, and I'm sure you've seen this yourself, you go out, say, to a restaurant, and you've got people sitting at a table and nobody's speaking. They're all texting to each other, and it's taking the focus into technology rather than being able to go within. Because I think we have the answers. It's just being able to quiet the brain, the meditation you talked about. I mean, we really have a lot of wisdom. I always say, as human beings, we are incredibly powerful. We've just never been taught to understand it, recognize it, or access it. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, I agree with you 100% on
Mm-hmm.
everything you just said. I mean, all the answers quite literally are within.
Mm-hmm.
And the only way really to do that is through some sort of meditative and yogic discipline.
Mm-hmm.
There are a variety of those, and we need to maybe do test runs on them and kick the tires. But once we settle on a sort of an established spiritual path, then we should stick to that. And as we progress and as we develop in those abilities and in that training and in that discipline, spiritual discipline, we then expand our consciousness. And those answers that were once obscure to us become more and more clear as time goes on, the more you practice.
Okay,
So
so we have people listening from all over. Like I said before we started, there's going to be people that are listening and saying, what are they talking about with consciousness? And, I hear about meditation, but isn't that like, and I know it's not, and it's not, but there will be people, and I've had these questions,
yeah,
as I'm sure you have. They think meditation means sitting in the lotus position on top of a mountain for 2 hours. And how many people, I'm sure you've heard, I can't meditate. So if you got any words of wisdom, how could we get people interested in these type of topics, including what is consciousness, for people that don't understand what that is?
yeah. Well, that there is a huge question, and that would take quite a while to answer in any kind of detail that would be satisfactory to the listeners. But as to the meditation part, um, you know, the scientists have really gotten into doing quantitative measurements on meditators and their, the waves, the brain waves that are accessed through deep meditation and all of that, and have shown all sorts of positive results about health and welfare and equanimity and calm and all of those types of benefits. But there's certainly a lot more. And it really goes back to this notion of uh, whether we believe or we don't believe that there is a spiritual element within ourselves. That's the key determinative of meditation, because ultimately the goal of meditation is to come into union with that higher spiritual self that is within everyone. In Sanskrit, it's called Atma,
Mm-hmm.
and the Atma is wrapped in a sort of a sheath of what they also in Sanskrit is another term of this. Atma is the seventh principle. The sixth principle is buddhi, or intuition, and then that is connected to the mind, which is in Sanskrit manas. So they refer to the manas, Atma, buddhi, manas. That is the core of spirituality, and the goal of meditation is to come closer into and access to a greater degree that which is within us. And the more we do it, the larger and the more expansive our consciousness our conscious state of awareness expands, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's really the goal of meditation. And it's not easy. It is difficult. A lot of people say, well, I try it and it doesn't work for me. I sat down and all I can do is think about this and that, and I don't see any results, so forth. The problem is that it really takes years to really see any discernible, concrete sort of results in meditation. And that's not encouraging to a lot of people. A lot of people say, well, if that's the case, I won't bother. But the rewards, if one persists, the rewards really outweigh the difficulties of entering into that meditative stream.
Mm-hmm.
And
But
so
we do meditate though as human beings. Like we just don't do it consciously, not on the level of really getting into the deep work. Don't get me wrong, of deep meditation. But how many times have there yourself? I know myself, I've driven home a place I've driven 100 times, and then I'm home and I haven't been conscious of the time passing or even
yeah.
how I got home, right?
Well, that may be true. I wouldn't disagree the fact that we maybe meditate in small bits and pieces.
Not on the
Waiting.
level that you're talking about, though.
Yeah. The level I'm talking about is an awareness of what you're doing and why you're doing what you're doing, and the ability to still the mind. I remember one very clever bookmark I saw with writing on it. It says, "Meditation is not what you think." And that's actually that's almost the best way to approach it, because it's not a process of sitting on your cushion and thinking. It's a process of stopping the thought process, you see.
Mm-hmm.
So that in that stillness and in that quietude within you, that's not where your mind is not being constantly occupied by a stream of thought, you're able then to begin to access these higher spiritual states or levels within us. That's Atma Buddhi Manas that I referred to, the Sanskrit term. And once that happens, then it gets easier and easier as you go along. But it takes a while. It takes a while.
It does take a while, and again, I'm probably not meditating on the levels that you are, but for me to sit still and to stop, breathe, and calm down, for me, I refer to meditation for myself in the line of work that I do as my workspace. And it doesn't have to be work, but it's where you get the answers, and it's where you can explore different concepts. And I would collectively call it spirit from a spiritual perspective, whereas working with my guides and higher energy beings, as well as my higher self is what I would refer to it, I can access it. And I have a process that works for myself that may not work for other people. So the reason why I'm bringing it up too, because I just think there's so many benefits to meditation. You have to start somewhere, right? So
Yeah.
what would be the best advice you would give to somebody that really wants to meditate, but hearing just what you said, and you were being very honest, is you don't want to scare them away, but how do you get them into this? Like, how do you get into the practice of meditation and get into the levels that you're on, say, years later?
Well, actually, there are some books about beginning meditation and how to meditate.
Mm-hmm.
The one that I like, and the one I think is probably the best that I've ever read, and I've read a number of them, is by a Sri Lankan Buddhist monk named Bhante Gunaratana. And Bhante Gunaratana wrote a book called Mindfulness in Plain English. And that book is just an icon of clarity about the meditative process and the goals and the methods. It's simple, it's straightforward, it's comforting to read. And so if anybody really would like to begin the process, I would recommend that perhaps they get a hold of that book or some other book that purports to bring people along as beginning meditators. So it gives them an idea about what the goal is, what the goals aren't, and so forth and so on, and some easy and simple techniques that they can apply.
I appreciate that, because I know for myself, when I usually like to meditate, I don't sleep a lot. I'm a chronic pain. I have chronic pain from a back injury from work. But so when I'm up, is I'm very creative. I have to create all the time. So usually when everybody's in bed, I'm up creating and it's quiet and I can keep what we think runs our brain all the time, right? We think that runs. It's busy creating, and then that's when I can go within and go deeper. And then that's when I'm actually able to reach different levels of meditative states for myself. So
Yeah,
it works for me.
I follow that, and I don't disagree with that. You know, even the practiced monks and meditators of the world understand that there are different ways to do this. For example, in most of the Zen Buddhist schools, when you go to one of their meditative sessions, they almost always include a walking meditation. And everybody gets up off the zafu, the cushion, right, and gets in line and very deliberately takes very slow steps and walks with their hands folded on their stomach, and you walk around, and then you're in some cases in a deep state of meditation. In other cases, you're probably looking at where your feet are walking so you don't trip over something.
Right.
All different levels.
It's keeping the body
Yeah,
moving, right? So the brain has to be functioning on focus on that. Yeah.
Exactly. One can still be active and be in a meditative situation or a meditative state. So I agree with that.
Oh, thanks, Kevin. So Kevin, Uzi Sun Dragon says, that makes sense, Lorilei, you creating and going deeply in a meditative state. Yeah, that's what I do.
Yeah.
And it works best for me because that's the most comfortable I am. And I never realized actually how much I do meditate till it was a few years back, and I went to a conference, and I was surrounded by people all day long. And I love people, but I was craving the quiet of meditation and being able, like, even when I've got an issue I need to solve or something, and because it's become so normal now, and when I was there for that weekend, it was like I felt like I couldn't think, like, because I couldn't hear that inner voice, if you will. It was just, there were too many people and too much energy, and I never realized how much I actually do on my own at my own home. So that was a big wake up call for me. Anyways.
Yeah, it's a lot of white noise out in the world.
It's
very distracting.
It is. So you've written a really incredible book, and it says it's based on 12 essays of ascending the higher spiritual path. And I'm going to stop you right there because I'm hearing, I do hear my guides, and what I'm hearing is a lot of people don't understand the difference between religion and spirituality. Would you be able to give them a little bit of wisdom on that, what the difference is?
Well, I can give them my opinion about it.
We're talking about your opinion today. We're talking about your book. So it's all about what you think. We're interested.
I got that degree in master's degree in the divinity school at the University of Chicago, where it really is a school about the study of world religions, is what it is, from a scholarly standpoint. And so I've had exposure to that, and also I grew up, I went to Sunday school and all the rest, like the rest of us did, and then I sort of went to other religions, and I was involved in Sufism for a while, and then Buddhism mostly. But I find that organized religion, and when I say religion, I mean sort of organized religion. It's not really an individual spiritual setting. It's more of a social and organizational setting.
Agreed.
Organized religion. Almost always there are denominations of people, and there are congregations of people, and they get together and they maybe go through some rite like the Eucharist or any other kind of rite, or they get together and they socialize after the service, and it's like a barbecue. And so it's really a social sort of activity to be in a religion and to be religious in that way. And certainly there are monks in religions that are spiritually oriented, but I find that for the most part there's a wide discrepancy between spirituality and being involved in a religion or an organized religion. And some of the organization of religion can lead to some very distasteful things. And I would point, first of all, to the Spanish Inquisition, where under the rule of the Vatican, all sorts of heretics were burned alive at the stake, and Jews were burned alive at the stake, and that sort of thing. So there have been some real atrocities perpetrated in the name of religion. I don't want to pick on Christianity, because there are others who have been involved in the same things. We look at Islam and some of the things that are done in the name of God and in the religion there. So that those sorts of atrocities are not ever perpetrated by people who are on a higher spiritual path, because those people, if they're authentic and real on a higher spiritual path, are people who promote and practice loving kindness and humility.
Regardless of who you are, and no fear-based perspective.
Right. So that I don't know if that's a satisfactory answer to you or your listeners.
I think it's a great answer. And I always say, because I went to church when I was in the womb. I was forced to go to Catholic church and then Catholic school and the whole bit. And I always say to people, again, not my job to judge. And if that's what you feel you need listening and it works for you, good for you. You need to do what works. But for myself, I agree 100% with what you've said, including the fact that and I can't speak for every religion because I haven't looked at every religion, but many of them are very exclusive. And it's always us versus them, or what a book says. And I always say somebody wrote that book that was a human being, right? Whereas I feel with spirituality, and again, I'm not trying to make this sound elitist, but we are connecting on a different level, right? And to me, for myself, if I had to define it, I would say that it's love that guides me, treating others the way I would wish to be treated, with kindness and respect, regardless of who you are, regardless of what your belief systems are. And I've really been trying to, if we believe in reincarnation, and maybe we can transition a little bit into that, because I know you talk a little bit about that in your book, is that if we can look at people from a soul level, that right now we're all souls united, right? We all are on the other side. It's nothing but love. And look at people from a soul perspective rather from the human perspective of maybe when they hurt us or something really awful happens, right?
Yes, I agree. I agree with all that. And in terms of that link that makes us all one, that is, metaphysically speaking, in the Hindu religion anyway, and also, well, not so much Buddhism, but in Hinduism, that Atma that I referred to as the highest spirit, the highest principle of the human being, that is one that is viewed, at least metaphysically, as unconditioned, transcendent, omniscient.
I love it.
And so forth. And that is the one by which we are all literally connected with one another. Because if it's unconditioned, it's only one, even though it may be found in between our eyes or wherever that may be located. I mean, it's not physically that way, but that's the thing that binds us all. And then we all have, all the way down the line of the septenary, or the seven principles of the human being, we all have quite different physical bodies, right? That's the base of that human spectrum, the seven principles. So those all differ, but the Atma is the thing that is absolutely uniting with all people, and it is back into that larger ocean of Atma, the universal soul, in a sense, which is the end of the transmigration process. We go through a series of lives until we reach our last life, where we are then released from the wheel of birth and death and rebirth, and our spirit then resumes, like as I forget his name. He wrote the book where he talked about the dewdrop slips back into the ocean. That's really what happens. Then that's sort of the end game for the whole transmigration process. Edwin Arnold, that's who it was.
Okay.
Sorry, I'm kind of old, and so these
No, you're
things.
not. You know what? I forget names. Sometimes I get talking on here because, like I said, I really, as I would call it, collectively spirit. I can hear that. I'm talking to you. I'm thinking about the next thing I'm going to say. So I forget what I'm saying too. So no worries. You're at home here. So I was looking at some of the things that I love when Gavin does this. I don't always use this, but I really want to talk about your book because like I said, I really resonated with it when Gavin had introduced me to you through email. I do want to stop for a second though, because Kevin said William's perspective on the difference between religion and spirituality resonates. So he gets what you're saying. So I wanted to share that with you. So with your book, The Higher Spiritual Path, what are the core teachings and of the perennial philosophy about death?
About death?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
the questions.
But yeah, there is a chapter devoted to death and the aftermath of the higher spiritual path, right? And we all die many times. We come into the human form from the lower forms of life, and the lower forms of life begin with the mineral and go through the vegetable or vegetative and into the lower animal, and finally into the mammal group, and of which it is said that there are only certain types of mammals from which those group souls, like let's say a pack of canines, a pack of wolves or something, or a herd of elephants in a small group, then that group soul eventually, it's all a matter of evolution all the way up. And that then becomes a monad or a single reincarnating entity as it first enters the human realm. And then from the human realm, it goes through a number of incarnations, and those vary for the individual monad, depending on a lot, because it goes through the contingent worlds that we live in, and these span sometimes several centuries in between incarnations, and sometimes more than that, and usually 50 to 100 years while we are incarnate, and then we die. And so death is something that we've experienced multiple times. We don't always have a recollection of it, although at some point at the end of that whole transmigrational process, we do develop the ability to look back and to see those previous incarnations. But the real, the place where death makes the most difference is in the final incarnation. And that is the incarnation where we either are liberated from the wheel of death and rebirth by a system of balancing out the karma that we've collected throughout that whole long process, or whether we die, and then at that point, upon our death, we are released. Those two things can happen. The first category, there's a Sanskrit word for it, of course, it's called Jivan Mukta, a person who is walking around this earth who has been liberated from the wheel of death and rebirth. And then those who then die in their last incarnation and thereafter are liberated through the transition process after death. So all of what we do is that we are incarnated from the very beginning. Once we enter the human realm,
Mm-hmm.
we live a life that's incarnate. Then we live a life that is excarnate, transitioning through the postmortem states until we're reborn. Then we live another life of incarnation, then another life of excarnation, and so on and so forth. So it's almost like night and day and night and day and night and day until the end of the year, so to speak, or the end of the period that marks our being within a human form, or forms in the plural. And in that time, of course, we're men and women and different people, and sometimes we're smart and sometimes we're not so clever, and sometimes we're violent, sometimes we're peaceful, and all this whole range and mix of emotions. It's not, it's just It's different every time. And in each time, we have our own unique set of circumstances that we have to work through, and with the karmic consequences of that process. So at the end, when we balance those karmic consequences, we reach that point of death. And at that point, just after the release from the death of from the wheel of death and rebirth, we reach a point in Hinduism and Buddhism that we can go immediate into nirvana and take our rest, our eternal rest there after this long process. In Hinduism, it's called moksha. It's the same concept. Or for a select few, they can defer going into nirvana or moksha and come back again as teachers of others. These in the Buddhist tradition are called bodhisattvas. These are people who have renounced or sacrificed their reward of nirvana for the purpose of coming back to help all the rest of us on earth, human beings, reach that point of liberation from the wheel of death and rebirth. And there is an organization of those people. They're highly, as you can imagine, highly spiritually advanced and developed people. And they are referred to as adepts, sometimes as masters, sometimes as mahatmas. And that's a core principle of the book that I wrote, because they have an association or an order where they train people who are close to that point, and they take them on as disciples or students, chelas, and they train them. And so that begins the path of those people to a point where they then die or reach a point of liberation and then also make the sacrifice. So the majority goes into nirvana and into moksha or whatever. And these are just, keep in mind, these are just Sanskrit terms. This happens to everybody, not just the Hindus and Buddhists.
Well, I have a different perspective than you do on what happens. Like, that's what I was going to ask you. So would I be mistaken in saying that what you've written about is based more on your experience with the Buddhist type experience? Is that where you're feeling you feel this is what happens with death, or
that's an excellent question, and thank you for asking it.
Okay.
I
have a different perspective, but I don't have all the answers myself, and I know that. So
I understand, but this is a very excellent point. The Buddhists and the Hindus are probably where you find the most detail in their scriptures about this whole process, unlike most of the other religions or sacred writings of whatever kind.
Agree.
Right? So they have an existing vocabulary for these terms and these processes in becoming. That's all I'm doing is borrowing, their vocabulary, because the processes that human beings go through in the transmigration process and the birth and rebirth, birth and death and rebirth, that applies to everybody on the earth. Doesn't matter what continent you're from, what race you are, what religion you were born into, what gender you are. Doesn't matter any of that. The process of birth and death and rebirth applies to everyone and always has and always will, according to the theosophical or the doctrine of the perennial philosophy, right? And so, it would be nice to develop a nice English vocabulary or English lexicon to describe these processes. But even in the theosophical works and the works of Blavatsky and those others, they also borrow from the Sanskrit and the Pali, those two languages in particular, and or the Tibetan, because there was a lot of this in the Tibetan, the Vajrayana Tibetan Buddhist doctrines and tradition. And so those terms are thrown around quite a bit. But, I tried my best to, while I use those terms in my book, to try to explain them and make a very strong point that they are absolutely not, that shouldn't be seen as limiting only to Eastern or Asian people or Buddhists and Hindus, but they're for everybody. And what happens to people is more or less the same. That they go through the same processes, regardless of the term that you use to describe it. So
Okay. No, because, well, again, I don't have all the answers, but from studying, sorry, never fails to get a dog here. My cat and dog are in here. I apologize. Is I, and again, my belief is that yes, as many of the things you talked about, yes, I think we can come from minerals, have a life experience as minerals and move on and move up. But to me, I think that, like, well, maybe I should ask you, do you believe in other races besides human beings? Or is that a loaded question? If it's a loaded question, you can say that.
I don't use the term races. I do believe that there are
beings.
Yes, okay, yes. The short answer is yes, I do. Okay. There are a variety of different types of beings. There are elementals. There are, and most of these are sort of vortices.
Oh, I'm loving this conversation.
They're vortices of energy and consciousness, and those energies and those degrees of consciousness differ. But there are elementals. There are nature spirits. There are devas or angels. There are these other types of entities, but these are all basically metaphysical entities. In other words, there are people who can interact with those, but mostly those people are fairly well-developed clairvoyants, and people who are highly sensitized to those energies around them. Most people don't see them or are not able to interact with them.
Sorry, I didn't mean to speak over you. I was just going to say, I agree with what you're saying, but is it because maybe we've never been introduced to that concept as a whole in today's day and age?
Oh, absolutely. Yes. Okay. Yeah. Okay. No, they've never been introduced to them. I'm not sort of casting any,
Oh, I don't think you are. But I'm thinking like maybe people were led to believe that, again, yes, metaphysical, because I believe every human being possesses the gifts of intuition, of all of the things that I'm, say, using in my everyday practice with what I'm doing and working with people. I always tell people I'm no different than anybody else. Yes, I'm a unique individual, as is every other human being on this planet, and animal, and you name it. But in a way, if you go from a consciousness and spiritual level, I believe we are all connected. But where I'm going with this is, I don't think I have any more special gifts than anybody else. I think that we all do. And where I was going with that was, if we had all been told, like I say, I hope I live till the day when I see that when a child is born, meditation is the norm. And many of these concepts we're talking about, including talking about the metaphysical. So that's where I was going with that. So when you'd mentioned, and you're right, most people wouldn't even tell you they believed in say nature spirits and fairies and I mean, we can go on and on and on. But if it became the norm, I wonder if it would be different from a child onwards.
But there's a very interesting, what I refer to as spiritual science approach to all of this. And this reminds me of the fact that the Theosophical Society, I'm not trying to plug the society necessarily.
That's okay.
Although I do like it. But one of the three objectives is they have, but the second one is to develop the latent powers in humankind for the purposes of investigation these metaphysical planes. And what that really refers to, quite literally, is the fact that all of us have not only 7 principles, but 7 force centers or chakras. They're nerve plexes, actually. And they sort of rotate in our bodies. And those can be actually developed consciously. There is a form of yoga called Kundalini yoga.
I've heard of it.
Right, which is that process. What the root chakra, the Muladhara chakra, is that's at the base of the spine, and so there are varying types of yogic techniques, pranayama, breathing, and this sort of thing, where a practitioner can develop those. It's much better to do it under the guidance of someone who's already done it. Incidentally, it's not a very good idea to go out and do it on your own. But in any case, and so as those force centers are developed, those latent powers are developed. And so you get clairvoyance and clairaudience and clairsentience and more highly developed intuition and all of these elements. So that then, I mean, a well-developed clairvoyant is able to see auras of individuals and actually determine whether they're healthy or whether they have some sort of.
I work with I call them chakras. I know that some people call them chakra. That's what Crystal Reiki works with, actually.
Yes, that's exactly right. That's right.
Yeah, with all
it's all connected to a whole series of what is in Sanskrit are called nadis, that are these nerve channels in the body, right? And they spread all over. It's a very complicated and sophisticated system.
It is.
Once you get into that, then and as one develops those abilities, then one then has these latent powers. Those are the people who are actually quite able to interact with the elementals, the nature spirits, the devas, or the angelic kingdom, and so forth and so on, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
right. That's why I refer to it as spiritual science, because there is actually a science behind it.
Sorry, I forgot to tell you, I have a little bit of a delay being up here in Canada, and we're broadcasting out in New Orleans, and you're out in the West Coast, so I apologize if I accidentally speak.
It's okay.
You. I love where this is going, because the reason why I asked you, and I shouldn't have said racist, that's a terrible word to use. You didn't correct me. I just was off the top of my head. Beings, because if we're speaking of reincarnation, which I believe in, I believe that we are an everlasting, if you want, consciousness, soul, whatever you want to call it. We're just here having our human experience in this particular lifetime right now. But what do you say about other races then, or beings? So I keep saying racist, trying to think about not saying racist. Other beings, what do you think? Do you think because they're metaphysical, or are they just maybe in another dimension, possibly? Do you think they have a soul? Could we have an experience as, say, the Fae or a nature spirit or something like that? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, when you use the word another dimension, that raises sort of definitional questions. I would prefer to say they are more or less in another frequency.
Okay, I like that word.
Of the emanations, because we have frequencies that are so minute that we can hardly see or hear them, and other waves that are like the size of mountains in terms of the emanation of the wave. These things that go through space, they're like giant waves in the ocean, right? So we have little ripples, and we have these giant, tsunami waves, and every size in between, and those are frequencies. So our ability, our consciousness, and particularly our senses. I mean, what do we have? 5 senses, right? Sight, sound, smell, taste, and feeling, right? Mm-hmm. That's only a very small part of the frequency wave that we are able.
Even our vision, right?
As we all know that dogs can hear a whistle that we can't, right? Mm-hmm. And what clairvoyance can do, when you develop those force centers that expand, and so these latent powers, that basically broadens the scope of those frequencies. So then again, we get back to spiritual science. So then you see these, they're not elsewhere. They're not separated from us in another dimension. They're all around us all the time.
I love what you're saying.
We're not conscious or aware of them because like the 5 senses that we're limited to, it doesn't include those little bundles of energy, vortexes of energy. Mm-hmm. So I think that's the way I would prefer to look at it. Is that
I love what you're saying, because you're right. Like, even when, as a medium, connecting to somebody's loved one, and we, overall through movies and culture, people believe that your loved ones are eons and gazillions of, if you want, miles way up in the sky, but it's not, right? And when you connect with them, they're with you whenever you think of them, and depending on what type of I'll say spirit, lack of a better word, sometimes I'm able to see. Usually hearing is my most strongest sense at the moment. Sometimes I can feel them. It depends what it is, but there's not that separateness. And I just love what you just said, because you're right, versus what I said with a dimension versus a frequency in the examples you used. I love it, because that seems like reality, or it really resonates with me, and I hope with the audience, with what you're saying. It makes a lot of sense.
Well, good.
Yeah. I got
Yeah.
another question for you, though. Okay. So
Fire away.
if we believe we're getting it, I'm getting it. I knew I was going to have lots to ask you about, and I'm loving this conversation. So thank you. About Bigfoot, for example. Now, I have talked to many who believe in this. We've seen pictures, we've seen video, but there's been many who really study this field that feel that they really have gone into another dimension, that they are dimensional, some of these beings. So, would that go along with the analogy you just given, that they're always there, but maybe they're so highly evolved that they're able to change their frequency so that we can't see them, that they're not really in another dimension? They're just able to mask themselves with a different frequency versus what a human could sense. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I understand what you're saying, but I'm not sure I'm the right person to ask, because I'm just not very well versed in
Mm-hmm.
that particular subject.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
And
I
that's
don't have any. I don't have any views about it. I just don't know much about it. That's
well,
all.
we had some comments in here too, so I thought I would ask. Hi, Kason. Kason's watching from Sri Lanka, so welcome. And Dylan, I see, is here. Somebody new. And Kevin Z Sun Dragon says, love this conversation, listening and attentively and agreeing. Michelle has to probably go to work in Australia. It's Tuesday morning. She said, have a great show, everyone. Thanks for popping in, Michelle. I'm loving this conversation, and I love to hear people's thoughts, because I got another word, because I've never studied Buddhism or any of these more, if you will, Middle Eastern, or even a lot to do with Indian belief systems. So, what are their thoughts when it comes to hell, like the traditional, heaven and hell?
Yeah. Well, I mean,
Or we need a whole show for that.
yeah, almost all. I could do almost a whole show on every question. I mean, the whole field is just so large and expansive. But to bring it back to earth and to make it a little bit more manageable for the viewers, there is sort of an analog or a counterpoint, I would say, to that ocean of bliss that's called nirvana in
Right.
Buddhism, and moksha in Hinduism, and for that matter, the Christian heaven. Although that's a different kind of a idea than nirvana and moksha. But those religions also have this notion of avicii, that's a Sanskrit term, avicii, which is where people who sort of lead the life that's antithetical to the spiritual life, not the aspiritual life, the non-spiritual life.
Mm-hmm.
People whose motivation are greed,
Yes.
to instill fear, control,
Service
hatred,
to self,
yeah,
service to
all of
self.
that, self-serving, self-promoting, self-centered, all of those things. There are those people, as we all know, in the world. And what happens is that when they die, in the beginning of the transition, the postmortem transition stages that everybody goes through
Mm-hmm.
from death to rebirth, there's a sort of a judgment process, a battle of your higher and your lower selves. And if the weight of all of your activities, the karmic weight of it, is in the negative rather
Right.
than the positive, then you're sort of bound for Avicii. And that may be temporary, it may be permanent, depends on how long along the whole reincarnational or transmigrational process you are. But that's a place of utter solitude and despair and darkness and, a place with no light. And so, of just mental and, I guess, emotional anguish and suffering. Mm-hmm. So that's Avicii. I'm not really all that well versed in it because there's not a lot that's written about Avicii in those scriptures. And I go back to the Vedanta and the Buddhist sutras and the Tripitaka, the three baskets of Buddhist commentary and so forth. So, we only have to Blavatsky does talk about it to some degree, but not in any great detail. But we know it's there, and that's one of the places where one, based on one's own actions, one could end up in Avicii. So there is that place.
Good answer. Now, Nicole Ryan says, enjoying this too. So my audience is loving this. My audience loves to talk about these kind of concepts just as much as the power of the mind. And then sometimes we talk about all these topics, different topics. And like before we start, I said, we've got such a great audience. You always ask great questions and, make great comments here. So thank you, Nicole and Kevin and everybody else that's here, and great comments. Now, you brought this up a few times, and I would love to talk about it because it's the word karma, and I think it's deeply misunderstood, and I'd love to hear your thoughts. I know you've covered some of this in your book, if I'm not mistaken, so I'd love to hear your thoughts about that and what it exactly is, because I think people misunderstand what karma is.
Well, yeah, first of all, yes, you're right. There's a chapter on my book, Karma and the Higher Spiritual Path. Basically, karma is a law of the universe. That, in its most simplest formulation. And there are basically a number of laws and principles of the universe. And the list of those, really, or the aggregation of those laws and principles, are really what form the perennial philosophy. Okay. There is it's immemorial. There's no beginning to them. There's no author to them. It's just that a lot of highly spiritualized predecessors of ours on this earth have seen these principles and laws at work and have recorded them. And so we have a recordation of these basic laws and principles of the universe. And one of them is the law of compensation, or the law of cause and effect. And that plays out in all sorts of different ways. And the word karma actually that's a Sanskrit word, and it's simply defined as action. That's all it means in Hinduism, is action. But because reaction is also part of action, then karma covers both action and reaction. And one simple way to look at it that helps us understand the metaphysical application of the law of karma, or the law of compensation, is to look at the physical application. The physical application is really what is known as the third principle of motion, that was set forth by Isaac Newton in his book In Principia, that he wrote in 1697. And that law says, for the physical plane, for physics, for every action there is an equal and opposite reaction. Okay. And that is the simplified version and the physical version. Now we need to translate that concept into the metaphysical realm, and it gets a little dicier, because we're dealing now with in particular with the human process of karma. There is both an action part and a motive part to karma.
True.
And both of those together are the things that are added up in our sort of ledger. We take through our various lives, death and birth and rebirth, all the various lives of transmigration, sort of a little metaphysical ledger book where all of this information is stored. And so at the very end that's the process of balancing them out and sort of creating a 0-0 on both sides of the scale. But it really does get tricky, because take, for example, a person who drives down the street and runs over someone in the street and seriously injures or kills that person. All right.
Right.
If that action, and so the action is the same. Okay. So if that action was purely accidental, this person was had to sneeze or who knows what, but just didn't see the pedestrian and runs
Right.
him over and stops and gets out and tries to render help or something like that. That's one. The action there is one action with no motive. Let's say, on the other hand, that the same person driving the same car and hitting the same individual has been paid by someone to do that. In other words, an assassin for hire who uses a vehicle to run this person down. Now you've got motive involved in that. Same
Right.
action, exactly everything the same. One person is motiveless and the other has motive.
And
All of
intent.
that then fits into this human karmic equation that we then carry around with us. So we really have to be extraordinarily careful of our motives and our intentions in life. And if we want to progress on the spiritual path or the higher spiritual path, we have to purify those motives and intentions in order to sort of counteract any of the negative emotions that would be associated with the actions that we take because of those motives and intentions. Okay. So, and let me also say one thing about the term karma as used in the West now, in the modern West. Sometimes you will go to a film and you'll see a couple of people, getting into some sort of violent conflict or a shootout, and then the winner will come over of this and point his gun and shoot the guy in the head and look down and say, "Karma's a bitch, isn't it?"
Yeah. Yeah. I
You
was just
see,
thinking that.
right? That is not. That's
Well, that's what people
retribution.
think it is.
That's exactly right. And
Mhm.
that's really a sad thing because it despiritualizes the real meaning of the term, because it is, in a sense, a spiritual concept. It comes from this ancient flow of the perennial philosophy. It's a law of the universe, this law of compensation, and it involves that. It is not just simply retaliation or revenge, right? So,
Right.
unfortunately, karma's gotten a little bit, the definition of it has gotten converted, if not perverted, in the modern
I
West.
think
And
perverted because
perverted. And,
people think.
I personally, I have the introduction to my chapter in my book on karma deals with this and says, please, reader, don't read this into what I'm saying hereafter. So there's a little introduction like that in my book, in that chapter. And I believe it is sort of um, an obligation of mine, or for those other people who teach these principles to others, that should be made clear. And so I thank you for the question, because it's a very good one.
Well, I don't know if this is my co-host. It says it is. It says it's David Hansel, but I don't think he goes by that name on there. If it is you, we'll see if you send me a message on Messenger. I'm not sure if it is or not, but we'll see. So Kevin says he did say hi to us, though. So hi, Dave. I think it's Dave, my co-host on Thursdays, but I know he doesn't use that YouTube channel, so we'll see. Lots of people like to copy him. Oh, he says, yep, it is me. Okay, so it is Dave. Hi, Dave. Welcome. Um, it is him. He's making jokes, so it's him. Kevin says balance, yin yang comes to mind via karma. Plus, I always, from what I've received from, and I always collectively, many of the beings we've talked about, I just collectively call it spirit. But the ideal, perfect situation, if there was one for a human being on this in planet, if you will, a 3D existence, sometimes I've heard it referred to, is with the yin and the yang, if you will, right? Is being perfectly balanced, perfectly grounded. I always say through the chakra systems, connected, if you will, through the crown to source, to God, whatever your belief system is, and everything would be in balance around you, right? I don't know if I'm wrong about that or not, but I always say that's kind of the ideal situation to be in if you could be. But then again, if you were here in a perfect situation, would you really learn much? No, right? You really wouldn't want to move because you'd just be in perfect connection energetically.
Right.
Like, then where I'm trying to go with this, it just seems that there's always a positive and a negative to everything on this planet. There's good, there's bad, there's light, there's dark, there's hot, there's cold. Do you see where I'm going with that?
Right.
So,
Yeah,
so when we get into karma, and when you were talking about the saying, we hear karma is a bitch, is the thing that people look at it as almost like a punishment. But when you were
exactly.
talking about the scenario,
Yeah.
right, there was intent or motive behind what that person did, shooting the other guy and repeating the phrase. We do have a comment here. Hang on. Kathy Hanley Little says, does forgiveness of others and self balance karma?
Well, the short answer is yes, of course. I mean, I'll get back to the first the message that you got about the yin and the
That's
yang.
why I was saying that. Sorry, I was going to finish that and I saw that question. All I was going to say is, I mean, that would be ideally, and as I understand it, if you're going to come to Earth, like, it's pretty hard not to accrue more karma, isn't it? If you're going to live.
Yes. One will accrue karma.
Mm-hmm.
But one has it in one's control to make it more positive than less, right?
Oh, I like that. Yeah. Okay. Mm-hmm.
Right. But getting back to the yin and the yang, I mean, the first commentator was absolutely right.
Kevin, yeah.
Yin and yang are really sort of one of the first and earliest expressions of this principle of duality and compensation. That is one of the principles or the laws of the perennial philosophy. It happened to have been written in China. Among the first to write about it was a great Chinese philosopher named Lao Tzu. They wrote a book called the Tao Te Ching, which is basically conceived upon the notion of yin and yang. And then you find that in Taoist thought all the way through, even to today. And it's only the fact that it's the Chinese version of a perennial principle that's been expressed in Chinese, Pali, Sanskrit, Tibetan, Latin, and Greek, and any other, Hebrew, all these different languages that are all talking about that principle, right? And it's a beautiful graphic. I really love the graphic of it, because it's got the little dot in the black dot in the middle of the white half teardrop, and the black drop in the white, like that. That's actually written a great deal by Plato, the Greek philosopher, where he said it was this flow, this cycle back and forth between, because what happens is that the little black dot then sort of overtakes all the white within it as time goes on, and the little white dot overtakes all the black, and so they're constantly changing back and forth. The seed, the germ, is buried in the essence of the other. You see. Okay. Anyway, that's just a little talk on Plato on the side.
You're making me think about this book I have. When I was in university to get my nursing degree, I had the anatomy and physiology coloring book. And there is I don't know what made me think of this, but this book is based all on spiritual energy. As you can see, I haven't done a lot of coloring in it, but this is the principles. Like, I think everything's energy. I'm trying to find all the chakras in here. Hang on. And I don't show anything too graphic on here because it doesn't censor the drawings in here. There we go. So these are some of the things that go through with the symbols behind some of the chakras, and to be able to color them. And then it gives you the key and energy lines in the body based on quite a few different principles, I think, with even some of the stuff we've been talking about. Oh, Nicole just said the flow. Like, for example, that gets even into reflexology to learn. Sorry, I got to probably cover up my light. And then I'm trying not to show the energy lines here, but where I'm going with this, I'll try and cover up not that I care, but they will because we're on YouTube and stuff. But this one, hang on, I'll cover it up here like this. Hang on. Let me turn this off for a sec. 1, 2, 3. There, sorry, I never show pictures. But for example, it goes through the whole body and shows you it in the circle. Even on the front of it, though, I can't show the key lines or chi lines, energy lines. I know you'll know that for people listening. We have lines of energy, things that work with like reflexology, acupuncture. Does that fall into some of your belief systems as well with the energy body too, with your book at all? Bill?
I mean, the Sanskrit uses a different term than the chi is a Chinese term, I think.
Yes.
The Sanskrit term is nadi, N-A-D-I.
Okay.
They're talking about the same nerve plexes and ethereal channels that run through the body. The two main ones are the Ida, the Pingala, and the Sushumna. The Sushumna is the core of the spine, and then the Ida and Pingala are the two that wrap around it, that form the caduceus, which is the symbol of the medical profession.
Yes, it
Right.
is.
So
We
yeah,
could
then the whole system.
The symbols, right, that are all around us that people don't even realize that are around it, the meaning behind them.
I know. Take a look at the dollar bill sometime.
Oh boy, we could really do a show on that. I love talking about stuff like that. Let me tell you.
Sorry, I didn't mean to instigate anything.
No, I loved, you know what it is? Like I've been doing this for a long time. I've just recently told my audience that I don't meet my guests till like 5 minutes before the show, but I kind of like it that way because I get to find out things about you and your thoughts and why you wrote the amazing book that you did and the books before it. Whereas if we'd known each other, yeah, it's fun. But it's nice to find out about somebody. It's kind of like opening a gift every week when I have a guest on because I don't know much about them until they come on. Oh, here we go. We got another comment from Nicole. She said, I have been told archangels are tied to the chakras or chakras. Have you heard that before?
I have not, no, but it's possible. I suppose I'm not that well versed in the development of the chakras or the activities of the archangels. You're talking about Gabriel and Michael and those.
There's
sizable.
So many more too.
Yeah, I know there are a host of them, but yeah.
That's the cool thing about having a discussion like this, because even though we may have differences in belief systems, and I'm not talking about just you and I'm talking about on the whole, have a difference in belief systems, the beauty in it, if we can actually stop and listen to one another, not just hear, and give ourselves some food for thought, because I can tell you my belief systems are not the same as they were, say, 5 years ago, right? With experience and education, meeting different people, our belief systems evolve.
But that's healthy and that's normal. And they continue to do it. And so at my age, I hope I continue, to learn and to expand. Right?
I think you're fascinating. Like I'm looking at some of these topics here because these are things I'd love to talk about and hear people's thoughts on it. And so to you, what is free will? Because I know I've said it many times. I believe human beings have free will, the choice, if you will, like even with where you were giving the scenario earlier of something that is an accident versus intent. I think intent comes from the ability that we have free will. You have a choice. What are you going to do with that choice? Right. But I'd love to hear your thoughts. What is free will to you?
Well, to understand free will from the standpoint of philosophy, one needs first to understand what the will is.
Okay.
And then you can leap into the discussion of what the free will is.
Okay.
The will in the perennial philosophy, the will is something that was and is part of the creation of the cosmos or the universe. It is a force. It's an energy. And there are other forces and energies also. One is Fohat. It's called, these are all Sanskrit terms. Another one is called Prana. Another is called Akasa, though Akasa is not so much a force, but a field. But in any case, will is a force. And it is inherent in everything that lives. Everything that lives has this will force in them.
Okay.
And the what's interesting about the human being is that the human being is able to develop the will within him or her, just as the human being is able to develop the mind or the intuition. There are methods to do all of these things.
Mhm.
And so, in the process of creating will, there are certain techniques, but will really is. Blavatsky once said that nothing is impossible to the person who wills it, right? But that
It's true.
presupposes that will is powerful enough, so that person has developed the willpower to a certain point. Now, in the process of developing the willpower, we do all have choices, but this gets back to the which which uh, which person in ourselves, the higher spiritual person or the lower animal person, the inner self or the outer self, which is going to predominate, and which is going then to be able to utilize the will. So, from the standpoint of the perennial philosophy, only the person who is through which the higher self is resonating, that where the higher self, the spiritual self, is predominant, only that person has what is referred to as free will, where the other person, because that person is now subject to his or her sort of animal propensities and lower appetites and lusts and wishes and material views, that person then does not have free will, but is subject to the will of that lower entity, that outer self, that outer person.
Almost
So,
sounds like it almost sounds like a cop out, though, to me, unless I've misunderstood it, because people that make poor choices that result in, usually life doesn't turn out great for them when they make those
yeah,
type of succumbing to that will, right? Do you see where I'm going with this versus somebody that would say has trained that will and now is able to have free will? It sounds like a cop out to me. If somebody understood
I mean,
that.
you're right. This is a difficult concept of free will and will. I mean, certainly, let's say a sorcerer, somebody who's a practitioner of black magic, would
Right,
be somebody who uses will, but not for good purposes, right?
right.
Whereas somebody who was on the other side of that, if you wanted to get into the subject of ceremonial magic, would
Sure.
be using the white, the forces of light to use will. Um, but it really, I guess, it has more to do with the choice that people are ultimately
Yeah.
bound to make for themselves about which of those types, because we all have both of those in us, right? We
Yeah.
all have that's how we all have the devil and the angel on our shoulders, right?
Mhm.
Metaphorically speaking, right? So if the angel predominates, then what happens is that will that comes down through, that is part of creation, is much more powerful than any individual will. Let's put it that way. I mean, that's the will that can move mountains. So it's sort of not the individual that's moving the mountain. It's the person who is associated with that powerful will uh, through the higher self, through the spiritual self,
I get you.
rather than the person who is uh, using the will for selfish purposes, because that person is not going to be able to use that uh, cosmic will, because it would probably burn them up or something. I don't know, but it would be too much energy for that
I
person
think
to
I
use.
see what you're saying. I think what
Yeah,
you're saying is, so it's almost like, and I'm not going to use the right terms either, but it's almost like somebody that's, if you will, as an example, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but it's almost like they've educated themselves and realized what it takes to, say, utilize actual free will versus somebody, say, with black magic and choosing to use a lower vibration or frequency, which is
yes,
energy, right?
yes,
And
yes,
uses it for service to self or to hurt others, it's almost like it comes with an evolution. Is that, would I be right in what you're saying? Like they're evolving past of thinking of themselves and going to the white magic, thinking maybe for the betterment of man or to help somebody out versus somebody that's using, and we're using just this example. We're not defining black magic or white magic for anybody listening, but utilizing, say, the black magic to hurt other people or for nefarious means, right? It's almost like would they not have maybe evolved to that higher concept of understanding? Is that?
I think you're right, because what happened in the case of those people, we're talking about this in Avicii, those people that follow that path of self-centeredness and everything.
Yeah.
What happens is that the higher spiritual self, this Atma Buddhi Manas that I refer to, that's this source of universal love and light, that in the other person, if the darkness, the dark side prevails,
Right.
okay, then that means that the spiritual side becomes a prisoner.
Yes.
To that, right. Whereas on the other side, if the Atma Buddhi Manas, the spiritual side prevails, the higher self, the inner self prevails, then the lower self becomes, in a sense, a collaborator with the higher self. Right? There are no more of those energies left in that person. They sort of got cauterized out because of the light and the higher frequencies. Those lower frequencies get cauterized out. So then that being is a whole being and then can use all of that cosmic will for those purposes. And it's extraordinarily powerful. Whereas the person on the other side then becomes subject to the whims of that outer self and the ego, and the spiritual self becomes a prisoner to that. And as a result of that, the amount of that cosmic will that has been able to use is diminished. Okay.
It makes absolute sense, and I hope it does to the audience as well. If you even think of it, even really, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, but simplistically in the terms of energy, so lower vibrational frequency, black magic. I'm not equating them for anybody listening. We're just using this as an example. But somebody that's now using, say, the white magic, not in service to self, service to others. It's could they go back to that black magic? Yes, but it doesn't serve the purpose. It's like they've almost grown up or gone to a higher frequency, evolved, and like attracts like energy, I believe, on this planet. Does that make sense, or am I really in?
No, I think you're right. I think that makes absolute sense. I think you've got the understanding of it.
Okay. Yeah. And it does make sense. And now, because when you first said that, I was thinking everybody has free will. They do, but I understand what you're saying with your book. That it's almost, and maybe it's not the right terminology, but it's almost like it's an evolution. Like, could they go back to that lower frequency, going back to using black magic? Yes, but it's almost like they see the benefits in the way of it's not service to self, it's service to others. And I always tell people service to others is a gift to yourself, because especially when you don't tell other people what you've done, because it feels good to be able to help somebody else who needs it and could say they were a thief before, they were whatever. I'm not trying to be judgmental for people listening. Could they always go back to that way? Yes, but there's really no purpose to go there anymore, right? When you've sort of seen, if you will, the light.
Right? I think that's right. And ultimately, we were talking about this earlier, you've got nirvana or moksha, release from the wheel of death and rebirth on one side, and then you've got avicii on the other side. So those are the ultimate results of choosing which is going to dominate within yourself, your higher self or your lower self.
I get it now. So again, people could have the choice to do it, but it's almost like when you understand the principles of energy, right? It can either be created nor destroyed, or it basically can be transferred from one place to another. It's kind of the same thing, but it's almost like you're evolving that energy, if you will. And again, using colors. I'm trying to make this more clear because I totally, I think, get what you're saying. I do. It makes so much sense.
Yeah, it's not easy, but you are getting. I can sense that. I can hear what you're saying, and you're right. You're on the right course there.
Sometimes we don't have the words to quite explain it, because it is, and then that's kind of why you see why meditation comes in too, right? Because then the clarity comes when you get into a meditative state.
That's right. Because these truths come without the need of any words. And all of a sudden, you just simply realize the truth, and you'd be able to see it. Then you get the hard part of trying to put it in words to try to
That's where I
explain it to
think
other
I'm
people,
at,
right?
because I hear what you're
in that
saying. I
meditative
didn't understand it at
state,
first, but I do now.
yeah, right.
And it makes sense. I'm dying to ask you this about yoga. So remind me if I forget, but I'm going to read Kaysen's comment. He says, Buddhism, especially early Zen, is actually ferocious. And I said, he's from Sri Lanka, and I don't know if he practices Buddhism or not. Not that you have to tell us, Kaysen. He says it doesn't acknowledge a continuous and concrete self, higher or lower, as far as he understands it. Would you comment on that? Is there anything you would add to that one way or the other, Bill?
Yeah, I think that there is a school in Buddhism called that the ideal is emptiness, and that there is no higher or lower self, and so forth. And that's part of the Buddhist tradition. And anyone who studies Buddhism would come across that. And there are sutras where the Buddha sort of admonishes his disciples to stay away from metaphysics, and that it's all doesn't make any difference, and what one should do is meditate and behave in a sense of with loving kindness toward others and charity and compassion. So yeah, I understand that. But if one digs deeper in Buddhism, while there is no higher or lower self, there are the 5 skandhas, right? And these are attributes or characteristics of the individual. And in that, those non-metaphysical schools, it doesn't go into where these skandhas come from and what the source of them is, but it's accepted that the skandhas exist with every person, that they have these tendencies and proclivities and propensities and so forth, and they're related to the body and the emotions and the mind, and there are 5 of them. What I'm talking about, in terms of the perennial philosophy, while there are a lot of Buddhist terms used, and Hindu terms, and Sanskrit and Pali and Tibetan, in the writings of the perennial philosophers, they also add these notions of the Atma and the Buddhi, the higher self, and the intuition that aren't part of the skandhas. And so you could say that then becomes the higher self, and all of the skandhas together are the lower self. That's one way that you could conclude that teaching. But my preference is not to get into sort of the polemics of religion, but to stick to the principles and the laws that form the first principles of the perennial philosophy. Because the sort of the polemics of religious and theological discourse is endless, and you could go on and on and on. But anyway, your viewer is correct that in some schools in Buddhism, in the early sutras, you don't find any reference to higher and lower self. Yes.
I hear you. And it's like I said, these are a little bit more difficult concepts that we're talking about, but there's a lot of wisdom I can tell in your book, and and we're not wrapping up yet, folks. I'm just sort of, if you're just tuning in, I keep forgetting to get into these deep conversations. I was supposed to do this at the top of the hour. So if you're just tuning in, you're listening to 105.3 and 107.7 to UFO Paranormal Radio Network, otherwise known as United Public Radio Network. We just like to call it UPRN, and you're listening to The Angel Rock, and I'm your host, Lorilei Potvin, and my amazing guest is William Quinn, or just Bill. I've been calling him Bill. He's so chill and down to earth. I said that to him when I met him before we went live. I said, I like your energy. It was very, very calm. Hi, Sandra. We only have, believe it or not, about another 10 minutes. That's how fast this goes by when you get into these really intriguing conversations. And I love having talks like this. There's been a lot of comments in the chat. People are really enjoying this too, Bill. So thank you for coming on.
Of course.
So what I want, that's where, see, I almost forgot. I got a little reminder. So you've been mentioning yoga. Now, I have a really bad back injury, and I have been encouraged to try yoga for years, and I haven't. So how does yoga come into play with all of these concepts we're talking about? I have a pretty good idea, I'm hearing, but I'd love to hear how you pull this in with the meditation and many of the concepts we've talked about.
Okay. Well, I need to give a little bit of context on yoga, because that is a Sanskrit word which means to yoke, or to bring together, to yoke together.
Okay.
And one normally understands that to mean to yoke the spiritual self with the physical self, or the higher self with the lower self, and so forth. But that's the meaning of yoga, is to yoke, or to bring together. In classical Hinduism, there is actually a school, a philosophical school called the School of Yoga. And in that school, it is understood by the early authors in the Vedanta and other sacred writings of the Hindus, that there are various ways or methods of yoking the higher and the lower self together. And what they refer to as the kingly yoga is called Vraja yoga, which is a form of meditation. But there are also these other yogas. There's karma yoga and bhakti yoga and kundalini yoga and jnana yoga, which is the study of the mind, which is the enlightenment of the mind, and so forth. So I think what you may be referring to is hatha yoga, which is the yoga that we commonly see that practice in yoga studios around, where it's you do stretches and you make yourself limber and so forth like that. And there are these poses called asanas in hatha yoga. What's interesting is that hatha yoga, in the school of the philosophy of yoga, the ancient Hindu yoga school of yoga, is really a subset of Vraja yoga, which is the meditational yoga, the kingly yoga, because it is an enhancer. It is viewed in that school that to have a good, fit, limber body is a benefit toward doing proper meditation. So that if you're let's say not well, or you're suffering some ailments or this or that, then that's going to have a negative effect on your ability to meditate or to reach higher states of meditative consciousness. So but get back to yoga. I did practice hatha yoga for some years before I gave it up, and I enjoyed it a great deal. And it is basically a matter of stretching oneself into pretzels-like shapes and alleviating lots of stress and limbering up the body and the joints and the nerve endings and the nerve systems and all of that. So it's a greatly beneficial tool for anybody to want to undertake hatha yoga. So I don't know if that answers your question or not.
It does. I had heard you mention it a few times, and I thought, well, I'm going to ask and see where it fits in. Now, I thought this was a great question here, because I don't always go through the questions here, but I knew we were going to be talking about some higher concepts tonight. And what this question says, and I think it's an awesome one, is how is love understood by those on the higher spiritual path, and what role does it play? We've kind of touched on it, but according to your book.
Interesting that you should ask, because there is in fact a chapter in my book called Love and Hatred on the Higher Spiritual Path. Okay, these adepts that I mentioned who have written some about this, and H.P. Blavatsky, incidentally, was a chela of one of these adepts. She was not herself an adept, but sort of an agent of them, who wrote all of the works that she wrote in the late 19th century. The adepts themselves, in some of their letters, make reference to love and hatred as being two frequencies, in a sense, on the opposite end of a pole. So there's It has to do with the polarity of love and hatred and everything in between. And in between love and hatred, you've got what I guess we refer to these days as mixed emotions, right?
Absolutely.
But that what they are literally are emotions. Love is an emotion and hate is an emotion. It's something that we feel. But according to these adepts, there is something profoundly unique about love and hatred as emotions, and that is that they are immortal emotions. In other words, most of the emotions that we experience in our lives die when our body dies, just as our lower minds die and our identities die. Those all are gone with the wind. When we die, the first three bodies of the first three principles of the seven principles die right away, and then the last two sort of disintegrate until we're left with the last three, which are the Atma Buddhi Manas. That's the reincarnating ego. But the fourth principle, which is the seat of the emotions, so-called the Kama Rupa in the Sanskrit term, is the seat of love and emotion and love and hatred. And they are the only emotions that survive the death and rebirth. So they tag along with that higher spiritual uh, reincarnating entity going through all these incarnations. And there's a karmic element built up with them. And when I say love in that respect, I'm not talking about lust or the Greek god Eros. I'm talking about what the Greeks referred to as agape, which is universal and unconditional love. That is love, the kind of love that the sun gives the earth. The sun doesn't discriminate where it sends its healing and warming rays and its life-giving rays. Everybody gets it. And that's the same kind of love that unconditional love is. You love everyone, regardless of who they are, where they are, what they did, what they do, anything. You love all sentient beings, animals, everything, right? That's unconditional love. That's the love that reincarnates. The other kind of personal love, that doesn't really, that just sort of disintegrates, right? So those are immortal emotions. And that
Where
is,
does hatred fit in there, though, after you die?
yeah, I've been really struggling with that. That's a very difficult subject. And I still haven't fully been able to make sense of it.
I have great
Apparently,
respect for
it
you
is
with that
more like,
answer. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you. I was just going to say I
no,
have
no,
great
no.
respect for you with that answer.
Yeah, but just let me bring this notion of Avicii back. People don't go into Avicii on the basis of one bad life or incarnation. That gets carried along too. And so if the hatred that they feel and they live in the sort of all the self-centeredness in various incarnations collects to a certain point, I think that's the point where that person goes into Avicii, not on the basis of one single incarnation, because that's too drastic a response for one lifetime. Maybe unless you're Adolf Hitler or something, I don't know. But for most people, that kind of hatred, I think, builds up, and then you pay the penalty for that at some later point in your as you go through this transmigrational process from entry into human form to exit from the human form and all the incarnations in between.
That you have been absolutely fascinating to talk to, Bill. Even Kevin said listening to William has been fascinating. He said the same thing. Great guest and show. I hope you'll come back sometime. I have so many questions. I wanted to ask you about Kundalini awakening. There was a million questions I had. So I would love to have you back sometime if you'd be open to it. Nothing like putting you on the spot.
That's right. I'm being recorded now, right?
Yeah. Well, we'll see. Maybe, well, who knows? I
We'll
don't know.
see.
working on another book? Or like I said, I have so many questions, and I'm sure others will too. Like I said, I've got a really sharp audience. I know I do. And like they love to talk about things, deeper concepts, sometimes lighter things, but I knew they'd have some good comments and questions. But we are out of time. So where can people buy your book? Where can they find you? And do you have anything coming up?
Well, I have got a couple of seminars and presentations, but no new books on the line.
Okay.
They can find my book on, where people sell books, Barnes and Noble, Amazon. Just go in and type in The Higher Spiritual Path in William Quinn, and you'll find the book. Unfortunately, I am not a person that has inhabited the social media world very much.
I realized that. I was trying to find you.
If at all. I don't have any beef for anybody who does. It just, I study and write and meditate,
Yeah.
and I'm not very good at promotion or self-promotion. So I leave that to Gavin and other people. But I appreciate the effort behind that.
I just put for a link, because I always do for a write-up, where with I think it's O Publishing, it's called now.
Yeah, that's old books.
Old Books, yeah.
Old Books, yeah. It used to be called John Hunt Publishing.
I know. Yeah.
During the course of my book, it was in the production stage somewhere. I guess they got bought out or something. Now it's called Collective Ink Books.
Yes, you're right. You're right.
Yeah.
Well, I put a link there to find you.
Oh, okay.
You're on Amazon too. I found you on Amazon. I found you all over the place.
Yeah.
Find Bill. Well, I want to thank you for being here. You've been absolutely a wonderful guest, and I love talking about if my mouth would work. I love talking about topics like this. And I want to thank everybody that was here tonight. Thank you for the great comments and questions that you left for Bill, and for welcoming. We had somebody new that popped into the chat tonight. And thank you for being so kind to the new people that are here. And for everybody that's listening, we'd love to have you come join the conversation as well. Yep, Kason said, yep, Bill should come back. I love listening to Hindu philosophy. Kathy, great show. I always know when I have a really interesting guest, because people will put lots of comments. I'll probably get a ton of messages afterwards too. That's usually what happens. So I want to let you know, if you would like, pop back in, same time, same space next week with the Angel Rock, 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time here on UFO Paranormal Radio Network. Also, Dave was in the chat. It was Dave. I could tell by his comments. David Hansel and I will be back Thursday night with The Thing at the Foot of the Bed at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I have another great guest for you. I forgot to check for next week for the Angel Rock. If you ever want to get a hold of me, you can get a hold of me on facebook.com/The Angel Rock. I'm on all social media platforms, YouTube. Kason, you even figured something out new. I do have a website on Wix, which I don't give out because it's a long title and I don't use it, but you messaged me on there. So you can message me even through the Wix app if you have to. So that's to book a reading. I do teaching and mentoring. I do energy healing and all kinds of things like that. And I have 2 groups on Facebook, Paranormal University for all things paranormal, the Angel Rocker Tribe for more spiritual type things, some of the things we've talked about tonight. And don't forget, Dave and I have that group started now with The Thing at the Foot of the Bed, so you guys can put your pictures, questions, comments, whatever you like for Thursday night show. I believe we promised you we'd talk about animals, so I'll have to remind Dave about that. Okay, everybody, so thanks for all being here. Don't forget, stay tuned if you're enjoying what you're listening to. Philip and Julia Syracuse are up next with the Horsefly Chronicles. Much love and light to everybody out there. Have a great rest of your day, evening, or morning, wherever you may be. Again, Bill, thank you so much for being here. See you next.
Thank you, Lorilei. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Yes, I really enjoyed having you here. So did everybody else.